Hello everybody, I'm Kashf, and this is Rocket Therapy, the official podcast of the Edmonds College Rocketry Club. Today we're going to be discussing the future of American crewed spaceflight. NASA has not had its own crew launch vehicle since the Space Shuttle retired in 2011, and we have not been to the moon since Apollo 17 in 1971. NASA is currently relying on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft to carry astronauts to the International Space Station. Well, you might be asking why this matters. We are currently paying Russia $81 million per astronaut we send to the International Space Station. In the event relations between the two countries were to deteriorate, the Russians may no longer be willing to send American astronauts up to the space station. How does the moon come into all of this? Well, having experience with extended manned missions on the moon would provide a lot of knowledge for us for future missions into deeper space, such as perhaps the surface of Mars or Europa. The United States has also not been able to perform any manned missions outside of International Space Station expeditions because of our dependence on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. Well, what is our next crewed launch vehicle? Until 2010, that was going to be the Constellation program. Constellation was actually a set of multiple vehicles, the Ares 1, Ares 5, Orion, and Altair. Ares 1 was supposed to be our crew launch vehicle, Ares 5 to be the heavy cargo launch vehicle, and Orion was to be the crew capsule. Altair was a designed lunar lander. Orion was intended to fly to the International Space Station for the first time in 2015, and Altair was supposed to land on the moon by 2020. We even had concepts for a landing on Mars. Well, it's 2020 now. Shouldn't we be on the moon? What happened? A lot happened, unfortunately. The Constellation program had become grossly over budget and behind schedule. It was actually estimated that one launch of Orion and Ares 1 would have costed up to $1 billion per launch. The program was also plagued with lots of technical issues. The Ares 1 first stage could have caused vibrations intense enough to kill the astronauts inside. NASA's solution was actually to put a giant spring in the rocket to dampen the vibrations. To the point that you're putting a giant spring in your rocket as a solution to a potentially deadly problem, I think it's pretty clear that your vehicle has some serious underlying issues. A report was actually found that under NASA's budget, Ares 5 would not have been able to fly until the late 2020s, making the 2020 lunar landing goal very impractical and potentially impossible. It was on April 15, 2010, that President Obama officially canceled the Constellation program. In a speech that he gave on space policy, Obama announced that moving forward, NASA would be relying purely on commercial launch vehicles for transporting crew. Ares 5 was going to be replaced with a new heavy lift launch vehicle called the SLS. Orion was going to live on as an emergency escape vessel from the International Space Station in case of an emergency or if the Russians were for some reason unable to provide a Soyuz capsule to help United States astronauts leave a dangerous International Space Station. Orion's mission statement changed over the years to become a deep space exploration vehicle. 2010 was a long time ago, and we're all wondering what the status of SLS and Orion is today. Well, Orion has flown once in 2014 atop the Delta IV Heavy. That's a much better record than the SLS, which has flown a grand total of 0 times, despite its original maiden flight being slated for 2016. Currently, the next scheduled flights of Orion and SLS hardware are an unmanned lunar orbital mission in 2021, a manned lunar orbit in 2022, and a lunar landing in 2024. The SLS is not without its criticism, and for good reason. The rocket's launch costs range between $800 million and $500 billion per launch, coming close to on the low end and well exceeding on the high end the launch costs of the Ares 1. The project has also been hampered with extensive delays and has costed so much. The SLS and Orion also do not have any clear mission. Whilst the Artemis program does have 3 missions planned out and funded, past Artemis 3, there are no crewed missions planned for the SLS and Orion. When you're spending billions upon billions of dollars on a project, and spending billions more on each and every launch, in my opinion, one crewed lunar landing 14 years after the project began is just not showing enough for the effort and time we put into it. Whilst glancing at the Wikipedia page does show a few missions vaguely planned and set forth as ideas, none of them are set in stone. And as we have seen throughout history, different presidential administrations will often have different plans for NASA. It is very possible that past Artemis 3, the entire Artemis program could just be canned by a new administration. Also, I know this may be news to some of you, but technology changes after a decade. SpaceX and Blue Origin are just two of many new companies that have been developing launch vehicles. Both of them are actually capable of producing launch vehicles that rival the SLS's capabilities and provide them at significantly cheaper prices. Blue Origin will be offering their New Glenn rocket, while SpaceX will be offering their fully reusable Falcon Starship, technically capable of flying to Mars with just one stage, assuming you were to launch more Starships as fuel tankers and refuel it along the way. In fact, SpaceX's current largest vehicle, the Falcon Heavy, is more than capable of performing the exact mission profile of the Artemis 3, but only in 3 launches instead of the currently planned 2. What's more infuriating is it can do that all at a fraction of the cost, with my calculations putting it at $300 million per launch. Looking back at 2010, we remember Obama commissioned a commercial crew program, a partnership for NASA and commercial launch providers to get astronauts to the International Space Station. Is it going well? No. The first manned commercial spaceflight to the International Space Station was intended to be in 2015. For those of you who aren't aware, it is 2020 now, and only now are we going to be seeing the first crewed flights. Only the Boeing Starliner and SpaceX Dragon 2 have been awarded flights. The cost per launch for the Boeing Starliner are estimated to be $90 million per seat, which is actually a few million dollars more than the seat on the Soyuz, seemingly providing no real advantage over a flight on the Soyuz, except the fact that it is launched off of American soil. The cost per launch for the Dragon 2 are estimated to be nearly half the price of both the Boeing Starliner and the Soyuz, at $55 million per seat. The Dragon 2 made its maiden flight in 2019, and it went swimmingly. Unfortunately, the Boeing Starliner's maiden flight that same year did not go as well. A malfunctioning clock in the spacecraft caused the spacecraft to burn into an incorrect orbit, which made it unable to reach the International Space Station. In the future, a company called Sierra Nevada planned to offer a spacecraft called the Dream Chaser, essentially a small reusable spaceplane placed on top of an Atlas V to ferry astronauts to the International Space Station. Blue Origin's New Glenn is also slated to be one of the commercial partnership vehicles launching astronauts to the space station. If you were to ask me and many other people, our space program looks like a mess right now. But I do think that there's hope. If the next administration doesn't show a strong interest in space exploration, private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin have already planted their feet into the industry. If the Artemis program ends up falling apart, these companies are very likely to start their own exploration programs. There are lots of opportunities for profit in space, from space tourism to rare resources on other celestial bodies. We've already, in fact, found rare resources on the asteroids and the moon that could provide real economic incentive for corporations to persevere with manned programs to other celestial bodies should NASA's Commercial Crew Partnership program cease to exist. This has been Kashf from Rocket Therapy, the official podcast of Edmonds College Rocketry. Thanks for listening, and remember, up is easy, down is hard.